Hey friends, today's episode is Aaron's story. His story contains some themes that are not suitable for children, so if your little ones are in earshot while you listen to this episode, I recommend getting them out of earshot just for this episode. So without further ado, here is Aaron's story. All right, welcome back to another episode of Tell Your Story Alaska. I am sitting with my friend Aaron. Well, friend, I don't know if that's the right word because we've only sat down and talked a couple of times. We have a mutual friend, and we met, 2 weeks ago? We went to a prayer gathering, something like that. And you told me briefly your story in just a few terms. And when I heard it, it really piqued my interest because I related to it a little bit. And so I asked you if you'd record yours, and you said, Billy, I'm an open book. So Aaron is here. We are sitting at Hilltop Assembly Church in Houston, Alaska. It's not too far from my home. And you live pretty close to here too, right?
I do, right down the road.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So let's jump right into your story.
All right.
Let's start at the beginning, where you were born, what your parents were like, the circumstances, what growing up was like.
Well, I was born in Garland, Texas. I moved around a lot when I was a kid because my dad was a pastor and a worship leader. And so I remember growing up on the streets in street ministry, sitting on stage with my dad as he sang or preached or fed the homeless. And that's kind of like where I was indoctrinated to anything church related. And then moving forward,
what do you mean by that? What does that mean, to be indoctrinated in church things?
I felt like my whole childhood was only with church people, and then like with church activities. So like if we went somewhere, if we did something, it was always with a member of the church, and outside people, like people that weren't believers or people that didn't attend our church. Like it felt like we didn't really have any kind of contact with them other than hi and bye. And
so they were kind of like those people over there.
Absolutely. I felt like, and I never understood it because I would go to church and I would hear him talk about, bringing people and witnessing people, but it was like, we have to bring them to church for them to get Jesus.
You have to bring them into your arena.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's what I grew up. And so when I say indoctrinated, like that's what I understood. And I grew up in they were non-denominational, but it was Assemblies of God. It was like super Pentecostal. And so like, you had the different things that when you see them as a kid, it kind of makes you wonder like what's real and what's not real. Like the being slain in the spirit and speaking in tongues very loudly, yelling, screaming, running around the church, dancing, like all of those things happened in my church growing up. And so, but I remember being a kid and just questioning everything. Like that can't be real. Like that's not real. And when the pastor would, they'd always have an altar call every Sunday. And when, the pastor would go around and lay his hands on people's heads and I would go to the altar because I felt led even as a kid. And the pastor would try to like push me down. Like,
and when you say pastor, do you mean your dad?
Well, he was a pastor, but he wasn't like the pastor of that church when I was growing up. And so, but he supported him and he did everything that he did.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, he was one of the men, but it was never him. But anyways, the pastor would try to, I guess, slay me in the spirit. Wow. And I just stood there and I let him push me backwards, but I didn't fall. He had the people behind him to catch and everything. And I was just like, and at that moment, it was like the doubt crept in. Like the enemy used that to seep some doubt in. Wow. And when I say turn or burn, like there were certain things that if you did, like the mentality that I was taught was like, you're going straight to hell. Like there's no getting out of it. And sexual sin was one of them. And I remember being,
like you're saying, if you participate in certain sins, you're just going straight to hell. Or if you don't get slain in the spirit, then you're going straight to hell. That was kind of the idea.
Well, I'm not going to go with the slain in the spirit one. That was more of just. I feel like that was more of just like. I don't even know how to explain it. I'm saying more of like certain sins, drugs, alcohol, sex, things like that. There were certain sins that you had to stay away from, the stuff that Jesus said that he hated.
Yeah.
But as a kid, when you hear those things, or at least I did, I felt like they were saying, if you do these things, you're going to go straight to hell, and you won't have a chance to be redeemed. You won't have a chance to be forgiven.
Yeah.
And so I remember I was 11 years old. And I remember I was very sheltered. My dad didn't let me watch any of the cartoons my friends watched. Like everything had witchcraft and everything was demonic. And, it's just, I remember him saying, all of G.I. Joe was demonic. And, He-Man was demonic. Like all the cartoons that I grew up with, Thundercats, like any of those things, they were demonic. They were witchcraft and he didn't want me to be a part of it. And so growing up, it was very hard for me because I was so sheltered to be around kids that were outside of the church. But I grew up in a neighborhood that was rough, and I grew up in a neighborhood that had tons of gangsters. And I grew up right outside of Houston, Texas, not Houston, Alaska.
Yeah.
and there was, you had the white supremacists, and you had the hardcore thugs or gangsters or whatever you want to call them. We had Crips and Bloods and Latin Kings and they were real gangs. MS-13 moved in, and it wasn't.
Oh wow!
It wasn't like I saw here. And so that's what I grew up around. And so when you didn't do those things, and you were the church kid, you were the goody two shoes, you were the snitch, you were the rat, you were the guy that's going to tell on everybody. I got beat up a lot. I got picked on a lot. I got beat up a lot. Jumped at school. And I started off in private school up until 6th grade, and then my parents.
That must have been really emasculating, to be kind of a weak little kid beat up like that.
It was
because you're the church kid.
It was, and I was very small growing up too, which is kind of weird because I grew up.
Yeah, just fast. To be clear, you are not small now.
No, I'm much bigger now. I'm 6'1", 280 now, but like back then, I was that skinny, scrawny kid, and I felt like everyone could beat me up, and I didn't know how to fight, and I just remember 11 years old, I walked into my best friend's room, his parents were not believers, and he was home alone a lot, and because both his dad was a truck driver, his mom worked all day long, and he was just home alone a lot, so like I would go over to his house because I didn't have to deal with my dad or his rules or anything else, and I remember walking in, and there was 3 of my buddies on the couch, and they were watching. I mean, I'll never forget. It was Debbie Does Dallas, on the screen. And
what is it?
Debbie Does Dallas. Like it was a popular porno back that day.
Oh, okay.
And I remember looking at it and feeling like disgust, but intrigue at the same time.
Right.
Like it hooked me.
Yeah.
And I remember being terrified. So like I ran out of the room because I was like, I'm going straight to hell. Like I'm a sinner. Like because that's the mentality that I was taught, right. Like if you do these things, and it was the fear of God was taught as you need to be scared of his punishment, not you need to be terrified of being separated from him.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm running out of the house, and on my way home, like I'm thinking like I have to tell my parents, like I don't want to go to hell. And I'm literally thinking as a kid, like there's going to be something that happens to me on my way home. It was 2 houses down.
Yeah.
And in the yard, then I realized nothing happened. And that's where it happened. That's where everything changed.
Wow.
Because I was like, I didn't go to hell. I didn't get punished. My parents don't know about this, And so that fueled and started my porn addiction.
Yeah.
And so
there's that little taste of liberation right there. From the chains of the fear of this punishment.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And what it opened was not just for porn, but for everything.
Right.
You talk about indulgence. Like because I watched my friends do all these things. I watched my friends drink, even at 11. Like I watched my friends drink. I watched them smoke weed. I watched them, fornicate and do all the things with the girls, and so it just slowly got worse and worse and worse. And when I teach this, I call it the spiral of degradation. It just got worse and worse and worse as I got older.
If the one little sin worked, why not the bigger and more pleasurable ones?
Exactly.
Right? Why not keep going?
Yeah. And so I stayed there. So growing up, I had a dad that had this mentality of he was very. And I love my dad. Me and my dad have a great relationship right now. I just think I want to throw that out there right now.
Good.
But growing up, my dad was very abusive in every way but sexually. Like he was abusive physically, he was abusive verbally, he was abusive emotionally, like all the different types of abuse.
Wow.
And it was really hard growing up, because he would hit me and then ask questions later, and wow. I got punished for a lot. And I was always in competition with my sister. My sister was the good one. My sister was the one that got the great grades and everything. And I was the kid that was smart but didn't apply himself. That's what my teachers always said. And I had, I got diagnosed with hyperactivity, which I think now they call like ADHD or whatever.
Yeah.
And they tried to put me on Ritalin. My dad was like, nope, he just needs more discipline, And wow. So that's what I got, And so if I couldn't focus, or if I failed a class, or if I, failed a test or whatever, I just got grounded. And my dad was one of those that chores had to be done a specific way every single day. And he would come home from work upset and angry because he, worked construction, and he was just tired all the time, and didn't ever have any money because he spent it faster than he made it.
Wow.
And so people at church saw one person, but us at home saw someone completely different.
That's what I was going to ask you. Was there a two-faced thing going on?
Yeah. Okay. It was completely separate life, double life going on. And as I got older, I started to see that. And I dare not tell people about it, but like inside I started to develop this like serious resentment for my father. And not just because I felt like he hurt me, but because I hated the fact that everyone thought that he was this great father, and everyone thought that he was this great husband, because he would yell and scream at my mother, and he would spank me until like I couldn't sit down. And I remember as a kid, being spanked so much that I had bruises all the way up and down my legs and my butt and my back, and I was just trying to get away, like, because it hurt so bad. Yeah. And the more I moved, the more I got hit. And so, like, I remember sitting there, my mom just bawling, while I'm in the bathtub, because I'm having to hold myself up with my hands because it hurt so bad. And that was just one. I mean, that wasn't even like the hardest one I got. Yeah. But as I got older, I got more calloused. But I remember the switch flipped from just having like a porn addiction when my dad, he went to Malaysia for an out-of-town construction job.
Can I interject one thing real
Absolutely,
quick? Just a thought I had is, it sounded like to me, and I'm glad you have a good relationship with your dad now, so we'll keep that in mind. Yeah. But when you have an idol, it sounds like his idol was like reputation. He knew how to have a good reputation in different arenas. But when you have an idol like that, the people who get hurt by it is the people closest to you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that's the saddest part of it, and how common that story is, even within the church.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, so there was like this switch, and I know I'm kind of jumping around my childhood, but
that's okay.
I feel like it leads into this. The Holy Spirit help me. But it kind of jumped to from just watching porn and like sneaking that kind of stuff, because I got cut a couple times. And my mom was disgusted, and she didn't know what to do, because my mom is a very straight-laced, like now, like my mom has been my spiritual rock my whole life, but like, she was raised very Southern Baptist, like you don't do anything. Like my mom used to always say, you can fit the amount of alcohol I've had in a teaspoon, and it was just, she never did any of the things that I did as a kid. Yeah. But I just wanted to fit in. I just wanted to be cool. I wanted for people to like me. And
you wanted to enjoy it. Yeah. This was your liberation, right?
But to me, it was more about the people accepting me than it was for me having pleasure or having fun. Like I just wanted to be accepted, because I didn't feel accepted at home. I felt like that there was nothing I could do right for my father. Like he just wouldn't accept me. But growing up around those other kids, like I just wanted to be accepted. Yeah. And the problem is, I went to 3 different middle schools, 3 different high schools. At the second middle school that I went to, I got in a fight because I always felt like I had to prove myself, and this is something I struggle with to this day. But I always felt like I had to prove myself, and I go to this school, and I have this friend that I develop. I was the new kid, and I developed this friend, and he was a poor kid like me, and he just, I don't know, we kind of just clicked, right? Well, one day we get into it, and we start fighting, and again, I didn't know how to fight. And he gets on top. He was a lot smaller than me, because at this time I'm starting to grow a little bit more. Yeah. And I felt like my size, because this is what I used to see my dad do. He would use his size to intimidate people.
Your dad was a large man?
My dad's my size.
Oh, okay.
So he would use his size to intimidate people, and I thought that would be easy to do.
Yeah.
And he grew up with four brothers that all, like most of the older ones, loved to fight. And kind of they had the reputation of Lockridge boys, like that's how they were.
Yeah.
But anyways, so like that's what I tried to bring into there, and I was getting beat up. Like I couldn't get him off me, and so I bit him. I remember biting him on the arm.
Wow. And
it got him off me, and we got sent to the principal's office, and I remember they called my dad. My dad had to drive all the way to the school to pick me up, and it was in like the town across, because like I went to a different middle school because it was like I couldn't go to this other one.
Yeah.
And so he comes in, and he just like, he was so disappointed, and so just like shaking his head at me, and he just said, "No son of mine would ever bite another boy." And I was just like, and he made a comment, I don't remember exact words, but it was to the effect of like, "That's what girls do," you know.
Wow.
And so it just like switched this thing inside me. And so I went to my grandfather, and I just asked him, I said, I need to know how to fight. Like I get beat up all the time. Like I just want to know how to fight. And I remember him telling me, and I don't even know if my dad knows about this, but like he was, my papa was a boxer. And he taught me how to fight. And he said, the one thing that he told me was, don't ever start a fight, just finish it. Now, his wisdom, like he was one of the greatest men I ever knew, strong Christian man. And in his wisdom, which I wasn't prepared for, he was trying to tell me, like, don't go picking fights just because you know how, you know? But if a fight does find you, just finish it. Like, don't, you know what I mean? Like, don't go be a bully. Don't go picking on people. Well, I took that way differently because I was not ready for that wisdom, you know? And so I took it as...
I've heard this recently, this concept of... a man who is powerful, but he has that power under control.
Yeah,
is an appealing man, the kind of man we should be.
Yeah,
you know, you have this skill, you can fight. You know, a soldier can kill. You have this power, you have this strength, but you can wield it, and you can control yourself, and you can express gentleness. You know, is a beautiful, manly thing to have.
Yeah, and so I from that point, I started fighting as much as I could.
Wow.
And then it was even crazier because I started seeking out bullies, and I would bully the bullies. And in 8th grade, I shot up over the summertime, and I was pretty much like 6 foot between my 8th and 9th grade year. I just shot up like a rocket.
Wow.
And played sports, and I, you know, even though going to different high schools and different middle schools, like I had developed a taste for it, you know, a taste for violence and a taste for, and so, and this whole time, my porn addiction is growing, right? Like everything's growing inside me. This like the spiral of degradation, that sin is just growing and growing, and it's becoming more comfortable, and it's accepted,
and it's insatiable.
Yeah.
Right.
You can never
satisfy
that craving and that void that you try. You know, what I always teach is like, you have a God-sized void that you're trying to fill with anything else.
Yeah.
Right. Anything but God.
Yeah.
And that's where I was. So like when I was 14, 15, I was prophesied over, you know, by 3 different evangelists that came through, like traveling evangelists that came through, and 2 of them were well known. One of them was just a traveling evangelist, but they came through and they all said the same thing over me. They all prophesied the same words over me, and they said, "You will be a leader of men." That's all they said, right? And so, again, switch flipped. The enemy used it because now I think I'm invincible. Right? As a kid, I think I'm invincible. Nothing can touch me because God's going to do something with me later, so I can do whatever I want because I know I'm not going to die. I can't get hurt. And a lot of situations that I went into, especially as a kid, where guns were involved, knives were involved, whatever, I got away with nothing.
You had this future prophecy set over you.
And that's literally how I felt. Like
run into bullet fire and you'll be fine.
I did.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's part of that's like the next part of my story, but that's how I felt. I felt like I could do anything, and I felt like I could get away with anything. And so that kept growing. My father, when I was 14, 15, did an out-of-country job in Malaysia, and ended up cheating on my mom with a Malaysian woman, and ended up wanting to divorce my mom, and talked about all their problems and everything else, and it just caused an uproar. He had to resign from the church, and from that resignation, you know, it was like embarrassing. Am I not speaking loud enough?
I turned you up a little bit. You're okay. You can lean forward a little bit.
He did things that I didn't understand.
Yeah.
And when he came back, all the secrets came out. And he had been sleeping with women for a long time outside of my mom. And wow. And so now, like, you talked about idol, like, I idolized my father, even though he abused me. Like, I wanted to be like him. I wanted to be a worship leader.
You want to win his approval too.
Oh yeah, I definitely wanted to win his approval. And I thought being like him would, right? But when that happened, I loved my mom so much, and I was like, in my mind, even as a kid, I was like, you're dead to me. Like, I have nothing for you ever. You know, what you've done is unforgivable. But then, being the master manipulator that he was, he convinced me that my mom had forced him into other women's arms through her rejection, and then brought up a story from a man that he was doing street ministry with back in Dallas, where they had a relationship, you know, and she had come to him saying, because my mom wanted to reconcile, even though he cheated on her and everything, she wanted to keep the marriage going. She thought that there was nothing that had happened that couldn't be forgiven, and he just wanted something new. He wanted something different. And so no matter what, so she tried to tell him, like, well, this is what I did, you know, and this, even though it was forced on me, because there was the head minister that he was under at a previous place in church had forced himself upon my mother, and threatened us, like me and my sister. And because of that, she was ashamed and everything else. And so she never came forward.
Wow. Like
most, you know, sexual assault victims do. They stay quiet.
Because of shame, yeah.
Because of shame, because of guilt, because of condemnation, because they feel like the church is going to shun them.
Right.
And that's exactly how it happened. Like my dad resigns and ends up leaving the church, ends up not getting with the Malaysian woman because she had promised him marriage and everything else. It looked like she was just getting a green card, you know.
Right.
She wanted a green card to come to America. And he started to realize that. But it was too late. Like, all the damage had been done. Mm-hmm. But he had turned me. He had, like, not against my mom, but to where I started to see, like, oh, maybe he's not that bad. You're like, maybe there is a reason for that. And so, fast forward again, I'm living with my father, and now he's married, remarried, and he has 4 stepkids that all live in the same house.
Wow.
And so his level of anger and his level of abuse increased with the new kids, but it all got taken out on me because my sister had stayed with my mom. My sister left, and she was older than me anyways. But so I'm living at this house, and it was just like you couldn't do anything right. And I started to get this anxiety when I would hear my dad's, because he had a big construction key ring, right? So when I would hear his key ring hit the door, I would start just going through my mind of all the different chores that the other kids were supposed to do that I would have to do just to make sure that they were done right, because I knew that he would flip out.
Right.
And I didn't want them to have to endure what I endured. And so it was just like every day was like this.
How old were you during this time?
Like 15, and I was about to turn 16. And so after I had turned 16, I had my own car. You know, I bought my own first car. And my stepmom was not a nice person. And she started yelling and cussing at me for doing chores that her daughters were supposed to do. And I'd had enough. And so I started cussing back at her, you know, and yelling back at her. So as soon as my dad got home, I knew I was going to have to deal with it. But she went right up to him. You're not going to believe what your son was doing and saying to me. And it was just one of those, like, are you kidding me? You know, like, why don't we tell him the whole story? And so he comes to me immediately, and we were doing the construction in my stepbrother's room. And so the sheetrock was off one side of the wall, but the other side was still there, so you could see the exposed studs. And anyways, he told me to bend over. And I was like, at this point, I'm his size, you know. Yeah. I'm still skinny and smaller, but I'm his height, you know. And I was just like, that's not going to happen, you know. And he's like, oh, you will do what you're told, you know. And he started talking to me like I was a kid again. And I was like, no. And so he starts to take off his belt like he's going to hit me again. And he goes to swing. And when he goes to swing, I push him through the wall.
Wow.
So he goes in between the two studs and falls, hits the sheetrock and busts through it and falls to the ground. I take off down the stairs because I'm just going to leave. And I get to the bottom of the stairs and I feel a buckle in the back. He hit me with his belt buckle. And I remember slamming into the closet door, and I tried to go for the key at the front door because he always had the key on the front door. And he snaps it off and pushes me backwards. And so we just go at it.
Wow.
And somehow the cops got called. And so the cops showed up. And, I was raised... Like, I hung out with a lot of dudes from the streets, right? We didn't like cops. We never called cops for anything. And anybody that called the cops was a snitch, and that's just how I was raised. That's how I viewed it. Someone called the cops. And even if the cops were called, you never talked to them. You never told them anything. Never gave them anything, right?
Cold shoulder.
Yeah, especially when it came to your family.
That's some kind of self-preservation.
Yeah.
Were cops bad in your mind?
Yes, because I had seen how cops treated my friends and treated the people around me on the streets. Yeah. And so, anyways, like, they come and the cops come and start asking me what's going on. And I was just like, my dad got into altercation, like, it's good now. And they were like, who started it? I was like, I don't want to talk about it. Like, it doesn't matter who started it. And they're like, well, he said you started it. And I look at my dad, and I see him talking to the cop. And I was just like, my dad said that?
Wow.
And he goes, yeah. And I said, what else did he say? He said, you swung first and da-da-da. And I'm like, wow. And so at this point, I'm like, loyalty's out the window. I was like, well, if that's what he said, like, I'm not going to talk about him. But if that's what he's saying about me, like, obviously I can't be here anymore. He goes, no, he wants you out of the house. He's like, do you have somewhere to go? I'm 16 years old and I had a job and everything, but like
How far away was mom?
Mom was 8 hours away because she had moved to Midland. She had moved to West Texas, and I was still around Houston area. So my grandparents still lived in Houston, so they called them and they came over that night, and I just followed them in my car. And the next day, I moved to Midland, and I started my senior year in a brand new school. And it's just like the whole process started over again, and so yeah, that was. I ended up living with my mom, and, the sexual addiction just really got prevalent there because I had a lot of time on my hands and, a lot of alone time, a lot of computer
Well, of
time.
course it did. I mean, your father, all that. I mean, what refuge do you have for, acceptance, love? Of course you turn to some indulgence. I mean, that's exactly what I would have done.
Yeah.
It makes sense. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So.
But that was what it was like growing up with me.
Yeah. Okay. So you are at this point a senior in high school. You have all these wounds from your father. You literally physically fought him, and now you're living with your mom. And tell me the next step in your story.
The next step in my story is I decided to join the military. I always wanted to fly, and the recruiter got me, and he didn't tell me that. He basically told me that they could fix my eyesight and I could fly. Turns out I have astigmatism and they can't do that. So ended up enlisting in the Air Force. I always wanted to fight for the military because I come from a military background or family. And so I joined the military, and it's like basic training was not a big transition for me because it's exactly how my dad treated me growing up. So it's like, I always told people like basic training was a cakewalk. And so I get through basic, go to my first duty station, or my first training base, and I had a girlfriend in Midland, right? And as prevalent as my sexual addiction was, like I didn't lose my virginity until I was 17.
Okay.
And I was with a serious girlfriend. Like it was a girl I met at a party, but like we ended up dating, and I really loved her, and as much as I knew what love was at 17.
Yeah.
But I went into the military with a girlfriend, and she came and saw me at my basic training graduation and everything, and everything was all good. And then I got to my first training base, and I meet another girl that's more interesting, right? And I'm like, oh, I'm not married, like whatever. And we end up having a fling, and then I call my girlfriend back home. I was like, I cheated on you, like I'm just gonna move on to this next one. Yeah. But I figured like I don't want it to be a secret. Like I just want to be honest about it, even though it's gonna break her heart. Like I'd rather do it this way.
It probably did save heartache in the long run.
Yeah.
But hard at the time, yeah.
Yeah. So like, but that's how I started. Growing up, I was like I said, I was the church kid, right? And I was always like looked over. I was always the nice guy because my mom taught me to respect women. My mom taught me to treat women like queens and princesses, you know, and that's how I did. But I was always in the friend zone, right? When I joined the military, and I always thought that I was ugly. I had a very poor self-image growing up, and when I got to the military, it all flipped. You know, women started telling me, like, they were a lot bolder than what I grew up with in Texas, and telling me how attractive I was, or telling me like what they wanted to do with me, and that again just
flips another switch.
Yeah. You know, and all these switches are turned on now. And so in that season, I was as promiscuous as possible. Like I had a serious girlfriend, but like I slept with as many people or as many women as I could find, you know, that would sleep with me. And you know, you talk about sowing your wild oats. Like, no, there was like a mission that I had inside. Like, I wanted to sleep with a different woman at least every week, you know.
Wow.
And it was just, and I was by this time I'm in Denver, Colorado. I'm stationed at Buckley Air Force Base, and my girlfriend and I break up. She gets pregnant, you know, with the guy from across the hall. We don't know whose baby it is because I was still sleeping with her while she's dating him, and it was just like this Jerry Springer type situation, you know. And in that time, still I'm still watching porn, you know. And now I'm in the military to where it's accepted. It's almost even encouraged. And same thing with drinking, you know. I remember going to my first function, and they asked me to sing the national anthem, and afterwards this chief walks up to me, and you know, he's a big wig, you know. I'm a little airman, and he's this big wig, and he's like, "Why don't you have a beer in your hand?" And I'm like, "I'm underage," you know. He's like, "I don't care, go get a beer in your hand," you know.
Wow.
And so it was encouraged. It was like, you know, you were forced to drink almost, because I'm not going to let down this chief. Like, I'm going to get a beer in my hand. Not like I didn't want one anyways, but anyways. So that's how, like, the drinking and the drugs had already started as a kid, and now it's encouraged.
Yeah.
You know, everything but the drugs. So like, I'm drinking, and I start drinking a lot. I start being as promiscuous as possible, and then I realize how lonely I am. I call my mom. Well, again, I told you my mom is my spiritual rock, right? So I call my mom, and I'm like, "Mom, I don't understand this. Like, I know you don't condone with me being promiscuous. I know you don't want me to sleep with women, but I have been for a long time." And I said, it's so funny because like the more I sleep with women, the more lonely I get. And she says this to me. She says, "Aaron, every time you sleep with a woman, she takes a piece of your soul." And she said, "You're running out of soul." And it broke me. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I cannot do this anymore. So I decided I'm going to abstain from everything. I'm going to try a season with nothing. I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to smoke. I'm not going to dip. I'm not going to have sex. I'm not going to talk to women. You know, I'm not going to go to clubs. I'm not going to put myself in situations, you know. And this wasn't because I was going to church or anything like that. Like, I had walked away from the church because, you know, rewind real quick. Like, when my dad resigned and he left, my family and my mom had served in the church her whole life, just like my dad. And that same church that we grew up in, that I, you know, we'd been there for, had to be like 16 years, I don't know, somewhere around there. Everyone knew us. We had been a part of that church for a long time. And I remember every time a member would leave the church, they would take a love offering, right? And I ran the sound. And so they counted the offering right behind me.
Yeah.
And I remember they took a love offering from my mom because she was moving to Midland. And I remember them counting it. And it was over $5,000 that these people gave to my mother so she could start a new life. And I remember watching them count it and seeing all the numbers and seeing them write them down, everything. And I remember they gave her a check for $500.
You're kidding.
And I was so disgusted at that moment that I was just like, and I didn't even want to tell her because I didn't want her to be devastated like I was. But in that moment, I realized, like, it's a business. It's not a, there's no love here. It's a business. It's how much money can we
all keep. About the money.
Yeah, it's all about the money. It's all about status. It's all about, you know, whatever. And so keep that in mind. Well, like I have this mindset where I'm abstaining, but it's not because of anything for God. It's just because I didn't understand what I was doing, and I didn't want to feel the way that I felt. And I knew I couldn't do drugs anymore because I was in the military and they drug tested frequently. And so I start to abstain. And then I go, I think I went 6 months without doing anything.
Wow.
And I was proud of myself, like not everybody knew about it. My close friends knew. But I was also, growing up, I was the class clown. And so, like, in the military, I was the life of the party. Like, I made everyone laugh and had a good time and brought everyone together, right?
Yeah.
And so they come to me one night, and I was living with two of my friends, and they said, we got to go out tonight. I'm like, guys, I'm abstaining. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. And they're like, no, man, it's been long enough. Like, you need to come out with us. Like, you don't have to drink. You don't have to talk to women. Like, just come out with us. Like, we need our wingman back. And so they talked me into it, peer pressured me into it. So I go out with them. Of course, I can't be at a bar without having a drink. So I get a drink, and I was like, I'm just going to sip on a beer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I start seeing beautiful women. And I'm like, oh, man, like, I want to talk to beautiful women, right? And so I start to scan, like I used to. And I see this woman at the bar, and I'm like, I got to talk to her. I go up and talk to her, and she literally puts her friend, like, she goes around her friend and tells her friend to talk to me. And I was like, so now it's a challenge, right? Now she's playing hard to get. It's a challenge. Mm-hmm. And that just piqued my interest. And I was polite to her friend. I was like, I'm not here to talk to you. I'm here to talk to her. And I went back to her, and I pursued her. And by the end of the night, she's already told me she's got 3 kids at home by 3 different dads. She's 10 years older than me. Mm-hmm. And I was hooked. I don't even know why. Like, I found this out later. Like, I had some kind of savior complex, like I wanted to be the knight in shining armor for her and for her children. Right. I wanted their children to be treated, the way I wish I was treated as a kid. Like, all of these things. And their ages were, 4 to 11. So they're 4, 7, and 11. Or 4, 7, and 10, excuse me.
You're the knight in shining armor she's been waiting for.
Yep.
Yeah.
And for, for the longest time, she didn't really, I pursued her. She gave me her number and everything. But she was like, she didn't know how old I was. Like, I acted older and I looked older than I was. I was only 21. Actually, I was 20 when I met her. I had a fake ID at the bar that I was at meeting her. But moving forward, like, we dated, and she fell in love with me. I fell in love with her, or at least the idea of her. Mm-hmm. And so we started dating, and then eventually she asked me to move in with her. So I move in with her, and then I ask her to marry me, and we get married. And the kids want me to adopt them. They want to take my last name because their fathers were just never around, and they owed all kinds of back child support and everything. And so I adopt them. And they take my last name, and I'm the proud father. But then the real stuff started, then the problems started. Then we started fighting, and then, her kids, like her son especially, he was very troubled, an alcoholic father that abandoned him, and he wasn't used to having a man in the house, and so he acted out all the time. Wow. Now, remember how I was raised, and I'm looking at my life, and I'm like, as much as I hated what my dad did to me, like, it obviously worked because I'm a successful member of society. Mm-hmm. I'm disciplined. I have work ethic. Like, I do all the things that I'm supposed to do, right? So how do I start treating them the same way? Wow. And I start, if they lie, smack them in the mouth. If they do something wrong, they get in spankings. And if with the belt, and I swore that I would never use objects because I used to call my dad an equal opportunity beater. Like, whatever was laying around, that's what he would smack. And I feel like sometimes I wonder if I made things worse in my head as a kid, because when I've talked to my dad about this, he's like, I don't remember doing that. Really? And so I don't know if it's like, you make like monsters in your mind. Yes. And I don't know if he just tuned it out, or he like doesn't want to remember because he like suppressed it, or if I made something worse. But I just remember my dad, if we're in the garage and he didn't have his belt or whatever, he'd grab what was laying on the floor. Yeah. And so
it's kind of amazing, isn't it, how the person that wounds us as a child, this is called generational sins, right? Yeah. You become the person that you detest when you grow up. Yeah. The person that wounded you as a child, you become that person that you detested. It's such an amazing cycle that happens, and it's so common even here in Alaska. We've seen. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's good, man. So I started treating them like that, and we have our own child together, and then we start, and she had promised me that we would have 2 children together, right? Because I wanted 2 kids of my own. And we tried and tried. And again, I'm in the military at this time. All of a sudden I get what's called an in lieu of tasking. So I'm attached to the Army. I'm in the Air Force, but I'm attached to the 101st Airborne. It was an assignment that I really, really wanted. And I go to the desert, to Iraq, and it was a tough assignment, and I got extended because the team that was supposed to replace me ended up actually getting killed in training.
Oh, wow.
And so I got extended while I was over there until we could train another team. But, that was my first experience with combat. That was my first experience with a lot of things that I saw and experienced that I don't want to say haunt me, but like I still see the image, like even talking about it right now, like I still see the images and I still see the things that really stuck with me. But when I was over there, like I realized how much I hated what we did, as soldiers. And I didn't agree with why we were over there. I didn't agree with what we were doing while we were over there. And I remember like I'll just give this one brief snippet, but like we were over there and we were on this, we called it a house clearing mission, and I was in a small base called Patrol Base Woodcock. And there was only like 80 to 100 of us at any given time. And it was, it was an Army unit. And our mission as Air Force, we were Air Force Intel. And so like my mission was, when we got shot at or blown up, like my mission was over and I became a grunt just like the rest of them. And so the battle captain that was there, he had said, if the next person that gets shot or blown up in our unit, like we're clearing this whole city. And we were between a place called Adwar and a place called Mujama. And Condoleezza Rice, I had been lying to my mom on the sat phone, telling her like, oh, I'm in a safe zone, like like don't worry about me.
Wow.
And Condoleezza Rice comes on, she's like Adwar, the last Al Qaeda stronghold, and that's where I was. Like, I was right smack in the middle of them.
You were the tip of the spear.
I was rolling with the tip of the spear. I'm not going to call myself the tip of the spear. I served with some really awesome guys, some guys that were highly trained, and I was highly trained for intel. They were highly trained for killing. Okay. And so like I know that the Lord kept me alive, but like they kept me alive as well. Like that, the Lord used them to keep me alive. Yeah. But yeah, I got to some crazy situations. But I remember this one in particular. We cleared this whole city, 36-hour mission straight, 36 straight hours of kicking in doors. And I just remember going to this one door, and the guy that was usually kicking the door, he was tired. He couldn't kick anymore. and he asked me if I would do it, and I was like, sure. And I go, and it looked, for some reason, in the dark, it looked like a metal door. And so I go and I kick it with everything I got, right? Because some of those blocks would get stuck. I kick it with everything I got, and this door exploded. It turned out to be a wooden door. It looked like it was metal. Exploded. Everything, like right off the hinges, the whole thing splintered. And behind the door is the most terrified little girl being clutched by the most terrified woman. No man to be found. We'd kicked in the wrong door. We had been given bad intel, right? And I'm looking at the terror in their face. Terror. I'm using that word for a reason. Because we were told that the Taliban, the Al-Qaeda, all those guys were terrorists, right? And in that moment, and I don't know if it was God speaking to me or what, but I was just like, we're the terrorists. We are the terrorists. To these people, we are the terrorists. And I thought, like, it was like, immediately I was brought back to my own house, and I was armed to the teeth. I always had a lot of guns in my house, a lot of ammo. And I was just like, what would I do if 10 dudes came into my house armed to the teeth in full battle gear, we call it full kit, in full kit, and terrifying my daughters and my wife? Like, I would kill every single one of them without question. Like, there was no hesitation in my mind of what I would do to those men as they terrorized my family. Yeah. And I didn't care if they were cops. Like, you come into my house in the middle of the night, like, I don't care why you're there. I'm gonna shoot you and ask questions later. Yeah. So, like, that again.
And that haunts you.
Oh yeah, to this day that still bugs me, because it's like and just to give you another piece of background for that, like where my views came from, because I was intel, we did what was called tactical questioning.
Yeah.
Which is a fancy word for interrogation, but we weren't allowed to interrogate.
Yeah.
And so we worked with the human intelligence guys. And so then when they were questioning these people, there was a guy that we had arrested that came in, and he had, like, I remember seeing like American degrees on his wall. He was like a nuclear physicist, and he was ridiculous smart, had, you know, all kinds of American education, spoke perfect English. And I was just like, why? Why do you build? I mean, because we found a huge weapons cache of just, you're talking ball bearings and the glass jars, like what you would see on the movies. Like, that's what we found.
Wow.
And it was getting ready to be real nasty for somebody. And so I asked him, I said, why? Why do you do this? And this is what he tells me. He goes, I don't expect you to understand. And just so you know, like, all the families live together. Like, so you have great-grandparents down to great-grandchildren all in the same house, right?
Yeah.
And he said they took, he goes, the Taliban came in, and they took my family, and they gagged us all, they bound us all, and he said they put us on our knees, and they lined up all the women from oldest to youngest, and they said, we are going to rape and murder each one of these women in front of you, starting with the oldest, working our way down to the youngest, until you agree to build bombs for us.
Wow.
And he looked at me, he goes, what would you do? And I, without hesitation, I was like, build bombs.
Right.
I would build bombs.
Mm-hmm.
Not a doubt in my mind, I would build bombs.
Right.
And so it just changed everything. Because here I am, this intel guy that is, like, I mean, tip of the spear, that's what we were known as, right? So, like, because before, all I did was build target packages and send intel to the tip of the spear. Now I get to see what actually happens with that intel.
Right.
Right? And so you had people in the military that would be conscientious objectors, and they would just quit because they didn't agree. And we used to call those people weak, and we would call them, like, you don't understand. Now I am one. Right?
Yeah.
Now I'm seeing, like, why they felt the way that they did. And so it just changed my whole outlook. And so when I got back from the desert, I started looking into, like, early retirement and all these things. But at this time, like, my, you know, people say PTSD, and I only had, like, one really, really bad episode of PTSD where one of the targets that I had when I was over there, I was at the post office with my wife. It was like 2 days after I got back, and we were getting our passports because we were going to go to Jamaica for my buddy's wedding. He wanted me to sing at his wedding.
Cool.
And I remember standing in line, this long line in the post office, and I'm standing there, and all of a sudden I hear Arabic behind me, and I'm like, oh no, you know. And I start, like, she always used to tell me that when I got really angry, I would clench my jaw.
Yeah.
And she could see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so she said I started clenching my jaw, and I turn around and I look at this guy. He was dressed and looked exactly like who he sounded like in the desert, right?
Wow.
And it made me start wondering, like, if this guy was even real, you know, like if I didn't fabricate him in my mind.
Right.
But she sees me, and she puts her hand on my arm. She's like, hey, why don't you go? We just gone to Costco or Sam's Club. I don't remember which one it was, but she's like, why don't you go get me a drink? And I was like, oh, okay. And so I leave and I go to my truck, and I'm standing there in my truck, and I'm getting a drink, and in my mind, like, a minute goes by. I walk back in. There's no line. She's all the way at the front.
Wow.
And she's like, hurry up. We gotta get this. And I'm like, what in the world just happened? You know?
Huh.
And I go up to the line, and I was just like, where did all the people go? Did they just leave? She's like, what are you talking about? I was like, you were like almost to the door. Like, there was a really long line when I walked out.
Yeah.
And she goes, Aaron, how long do you think you've been gone? And I said, I don't know, a couple minutes. And she's like, Aaron, you've been gone for over an hour. So wow. I had, like, this time lapse where I completely blacked out, and what I wanted in that time, I wanted to murder that guy. Like, I wanted to, like, in my mind, he was a PID, which was shoot on sight. Like, yeah. And so, anyways, like, that was but I never wanted to go to the doctor, and I never wanted to go to the therapist because I saw what it did to my buddies. I saw, like, it turned them into zombies when they took that medication to get off PTSD. Yeah. And so, you know, I call my mom and I tell her about everything, and she starts really praying for me, really interceding for me. And I was thankful because, you know, I was so deep in my sexual addiction at this point that, and you talk about double life, like I had become my father. Like, I was living a double life where everyone thought I was this awesome father, this awesome husband, this awesome, you know, sergeant in the military,
war hero.
Yeah, I was decorated combat vet now, but deep down inside, I was broken. I was scared. I was desperate for people's approval, and like all of my woundings as a kid had haunted me as an adult, and so like these things that were prevalent were like my sexual addiction. I still wanted to be promiscuous. I still put myself in situations that could lead to something, right. Being like even the perception of something being wrong. And it started to get easier and easier to where I just thought about cheating on my wife, and then I started cheating on my wife, and I started, like the sexual things, even the porn addiction got worse and worse and worse. And when I say the spiral of degradation, right. Like the porn got worse. Mm-hmm. So things that disgusted me when I first started watching porn and saying like, I would never, how does someone do that? Now we're intriguing. Now we're even like, so I was so desensitized to things that should be disgusting to a human. Yeah. I was desensitized to them, and it was because I was exposed to it. And what I tell people is what most people don't understand is even in intel in the military, you're exposed to things that you should never see. Right. Right. So if you're an intel guy and you're looking through, like, especially Russians were the worst, and they would hide codes or hide things inside the worst kind of porn, child porn, bestiality, things that would normally disgust a regular person. You're having to sift through these things and look for clues, look for different things that would lead to information. Yeah. And that was my first exposing. Wow. And so that's what the enemy did. The enemy used these little tidbits, right, of exposure. Well, when just straight up porn is not meeting that insatiable need, you have to get something more intense, something more perverse, something more something, and just to get that high, that pleasure, that and it's no different for drugs, and it's no different for alcohol, right? So when you first start drinking alcohol, one beer I'd get a buzz, right? And then after I drank a few times, now I need 2 beers, now I need 6 beers, now I need a case of beer, right? And it's no different for porn, right? Yeah. And so the chemicals that were released in my brain, like I became dependent on those chemicals. I needed that dopamine release when I masturbated or when I looked at pornography. I needed that. Right. I had to have it. And you talk about insatiable, like it got worse and worse to where, I could watch porn for 3 hours a day and no one would know. Yeah. That was the thing. I was so good at hiding it. And being intel, I knew about computers. Yeah. And I knew about, history, and I knew about, like, because we got people, we hung people for having things on their phone and having things on their computer in the desert, right? We would look for those things, and we had software that would rip your computer and your phone apart to where anything that you'd ever, even if it was a footprint, even if you didn't mean to click on it, nope, that was enough. Even if they tried to hide their tracks, you knew how to find it. Exactly. Yeah. And so God used that to save me. How's that? I started watching porn that resembled my life. So now I have daughters that were 4 and 7 when I met them. Now they're 14 and 17. We're talking 10 years down the road, right? 14 and 17, about to turn 15 and 18, but I start watching porn that's like father-daughter, father-stepdaughter type porn. And in that pornography, it starts to awaken something inside of me, that was never awake before. And like I said, I was so desensitized. And I start seeing these situations in the pornography that I was watching play out in real life. And I start to wonder, like, is this real? And at this point, my wife and I are having horrible problems. We're fighting constantly. Our sex life is non-existent. So in my mind, just like my father did, I'm justifying, my actions. I'm justifying my desires. I'm saying, like, and this is one of the things my dad taught me when I was growing up was a man's first need is sex, a woman's first need is communication. Right? So these lies that I was told as a kid, like they had been compounded and grown into something that I saw as truth. It was my truth, right? So fast forward, I'm stationed in Alaska now. We had our second kid. We had 7 miscarriages and 1 ghost pregnancy. Ghost pregnancy, I don't know if you know what that is, but it's where the woman wants to be pregnant so much that her body literally tricks itself into being pregnant. And so
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it shows up on a pregnancy test as pregnant. All the sac starts to develop and grow.
Yeah.
And you go in for your first appointment and they do the ultrasound and there's nothing there.
There's nothing there. Wow.
And they have to do a DNC to get everything out. So like that devastated her. But we ended up having a baby shortly after that. But it was like we were only having another kid to save our marriage.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's going to work. And
what a burden to put on a baby.
Oh, horrible.
Yeah.
And my baby suffered for it ever since. And so at this point, the self-deprecation, the self-loathing, like all of these things, and I had become extremely selfish at this point in time. I was cheating on my wife constantly. I started to allow myself to do things that I never would have done before. And what it led to was me having a situation with both of my older, they were my adopted daughters, but they considered themselves my stepdaughters.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I justified it in my mind. Like these are not my daughters. Right. And this is how the enemy lied to me. Like, those aren't your daughters.
Yeah.
So like, besides the fact that they were minors, like now I'm in my mind, I'm thinking like, well, this happens all the time in the porn that I watch.
Yeah.
Like maybe this can happen in real life. And so sure enough, it led to me, in treatment, we call it grooming, right? I groomed them. And even while I was doing it, I was like asking him, is this okay? Like, is this all right? So like turned off like the shoulder massage, right?
Yeah.
And it turned into me, and hearing this word, like it even like affects me, but like molesting my own daughters, right? I groped their breast. And my youngest daughter, the youngest adopted daughter, because I had two biological daughters after that, but she was brave enough to come forward, and she texted me from her friend's house. She was grounded. She texted me from her friend's house, and she's like, "I'm going to tell mom what you did." And what's so crazy is, and
good for her, huh?
Yeah, great for her.
Yeah.
And this is what I said, that God used all of this to save me, right? Because I believe that I was such a master manipulator. I believe that I lived such a double life that I was destined for hell. I don't care what the prophecy said. I don't care. Like I believed in my heart, like I wouldn't even pray for dinner. I would have my kids pray for dinner because I felt like God did not hear me. Like he had, the scripture that says he will turn you over to your sins, right? Give you to the world. So like I believe that about myself. I believe that I was so deep in my sin that he had completely shunned me.
The idea is if you're condemned anyways, you might as well, whatever.
Do it. And that's what I did. And so, anyways, she says she's going to come forward, and in my twisted thinking and my twisted mind, this is what I text back. Just make sure you tell the whole truth. Right? Because in my mind it was justified. And what it means is she came on to me. Oh. A 14-year-old girl came on to me, right? A 14-year-old girl was able to give consent for me to touch her, right? Not the fact that I was the parent, not the fact that I was the one taking advantage in a leadership position, like all the different things that they say. I didn't understand any of that. All I saw was a girl that dressed provocatively, that I felt came on. She's 14. Yeah. Right. And so, but in that time, I was so twisted and so broken and so disgusting that like that's how I thought it was okay. Yeah. And my oldest daughter got the same treatment. Right. Same scenario played out. Yeah. And the same thing happened to her. And so when she came forward and I told her to tell the truth, at first I tried to lie. Right. At first I told I was like because my son had done the same thing. And it was like the enemy just set this whole thing up. My son had done the same thing. He had accused me of molesting him when he was, I think, 12, and it was false. And that one didn't happen, but it was like a prelude to this.
Oh, I see.
Right? And so now she's saying, now she's starting to doubt whether all that was true, because we had to go through 6 months of separation. I almost lost my clearance in the military, and it took like lots of counseling and everything for him to admit, like, no, I just made this up because I didn't want him in the house anymore. Wow. It's like I never had a male, discipline or anything like that. And, and so I had to take parenting classes and learn how to discipline my kids, all that stuff. So a prelude to that led to her doubting or even believing anything that I was saying. Wow. Praise God, right? Praise God she didn't believe me. Yeah. Because I'm sitting there trying to tell her, like, no, she's just making this stuff up. Like, why would I do that? And I'm asking questions. Instead of saying, like, no, I never did this, why would I do that? Yeah. I love her. Why would I touch her? Why would I touch
Now you've become the master manipulator like your dad was.
Oh yeah, yeah. And so that fateful night, I'll never forget it. February 16th, 2014. I look out my window because my wife had called, and I told her on the phone. I said, I know I'm being recorded, but I can't do this anymore. And she's like, so tell me everything. And I said, what do you want to know? I'll tell you anything. Because I couldn't do it. I was so broken, and I was so tired of hiding. I was so tired of living a secret life. And so she asked me, she said, have you ever used your phone? Have you ever, did you touch, Faith? Did you do what she said? And I said, yes, to everything. Wow. And I said, and I know I'm being recorded, but it's okay. Like, I want to tell you the truth. And so before she hung up, I said, I promise you this, I will do whatever it takes to become the man that y'all deserve, the husband and the father that y'all deserve. And she hung up. About 3 hours later, I just felt something different. And I look out my window and I see 5 shadows coming up my driveway. I was living in Eagle River at the time. And they came to the door, and I don't know what she told them about me, but they looked terrified. And the first cop, he's got his hand on his gun, and he's like, Mr. Lockridge, are you armed right now? Mm-hmm. And I was like, no. And they were like, well, do you have weapons in the house? I was like, I have weapons in this house. Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, can you point them out? I was like, there's too many to point out. I was like, just come in. I'll stay with wherever you want me to stay. So they came in and they interviewed me for probably 4 or 5 hours. I mean, just constant questioning. And I told them everything. Yeah. Everything. I didn't care. I knew I should have a lawyer. I knew.
What shifted in you that all of a sudden I'm just going clean with everything? Why did that happen?
I broke. I couldn't hide anymore.
Yeah.
I had lived a life for so long that I didn't even know who I was. I would look in the mirror and I was just disgusted with what I saw. And I knew God. I had experienced, when I was a kid, I was on fire for God. I was like, when I was prophesied over, like you couldn't stop me from witnessing to people. You couldn't stop me from telling people about Jesus, right? I remember I broke my back on the skating rink, right? As a kid, I broke my back on the skating rink. They come and get me off the ice. Because I had fallen and I went to grab myself and my whole back like hyperextended like a scorpion. Yeah. And I heard a snap and I couldn't move, right? So they take me to the hospital, and I remember on the way to the hospital, I'm witnessing to the ambulance, the guy in the ambulance with me, the guy that's working on me, right? Get to the hospital and I'm witnessing to the doctors that are x-raying me, the x-ray techs. Like, I'm witnessing to everybody, telling them all about Jesus. And they're just looking at like this kid, it's crazy. Like, what is he doing? In that moment though, God healed me. Really? Completely. Like, there was nothing wrong with me. Wow. And they saw that, and I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that someone was touched that day, right? Someone was touched by Jesus that day. But that's how I was. Wow. Back then. But then I got broken. I got hurt by the church. I got hurt by the men in my life especially, and it broke me. So I lived this double life, and I, like you said, the generational curse. Like, I had become the curse. I had become, like, those things were not. And the things that the thing is that when I got arrested finally, because they didn't arrest me for a whole week, but when I got arrested, my first night in jail, went to Anchorage jail, right? My first night in jail, I was done. I was broken. You couldn't, like, that was all I needed was one night in jail, right? Yeah. And I was broken before that, but like having one night in jail, knowing what I was charged with, knowing what they were coming at me with, especially the fact that I had admitted everything. Yeah. Like, I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. And in that moment, I was lost, right? And I had talked to my mom. I had gone, so February 16th is the night that the cops came. February 17th, I started searching anywhere I could for help. I was like, I need help. So I'm looking up like sexual addiction. I'm looking up because I didn't know about sexual addiction. I didn't know that it was real. I thought people just use that as they just like to have sex or whatever. I found out that it was real. You know, it was just like any other addiction because of the chemical releases that happen in your brain and the neural pathways that are created. And so I go to Anchorage Baptist Temple and I meet my first mentor. Mm-hmm. Right, we go in that night. And I didn't know how they did groups or anything like that. But I walk in, and they're like, "Oh, so you're the new guy, blah blah blah." And man, I just start vomiting like everything in my life from the childhood on, my whole like anything I had done wrong, like all this stuff. And they're all looking at me like, and now I feel like, oh my God, I overshared, or like no one else is like me. But that's not what happened. What happened is, they start saying, "Brother, thanks so much for sharing. Like, that's not how we normally do it, but we really appreciate your honesty. And just so you know, like, each one of us has been where you're at or has gone through something similar, you know, and we may not have the exact story, but you're not alone." My whole life, I thought I was alone, right? So now I'm surrounded by believers that understand me. Yeah. They don't think I'm weird. They don't think I'm crazy. Because that was why I never told anybody, right? I never told anybody what was really going on in my life because I was terrified that I would lose everyone. I was terrified of rejection. I was terrified of not being approved anymore. I'd worked so hard to be at the top of my career field in the military, you know, and to get as many medals on my chest as I could, just so people would look at me and see that. So they wouldn't see underneath and see the broken man that I was, or broken boy. I wasn't even a man, this broken boy that I was. Yeah. So I tell everyone, prison was the best thing that ever happened to me, right? Prison was where God saved me. Prison was where God renewed my hunger and thirst for righteousness, renewed my hunger and thirst for Him, for serving Him, you know, really, really understanding where that was.
That reminds me, in the Beatitudes, when Jesus, the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, the first one, I think it was the first one, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Yeah. To be poor in spirit means to be broken. Because when you're broken, you're ready to receive. Yeah. If you're not broken, that's a wall. There's something, the metals, the reputation, whatever it is keeping you from receiving true life, true freedom, true joy. Yeah. Anyway, that reminded me of that.
Yeah, but that's totally accurate because I had hit rock bottom. Yeah. And I had nothing and no one, except for the family and one friend that stuck around. So these military brothers, right, that we always said same blood, same mud, right? So like we served together for over a decade, and they're nowhere to be found. Wow. They're shunning me. They don't want to talk to me. They're disgusted with me, you know, and rightly so, because that's where I would have been if any of them had been like that, you know. So I felt like I was alone. And I felt like I didn't have anywhere to go and no one to turn to. And I remember meeting a chaplain inside, Chaplain Silliman. He's a lot older now, but he just a powerful man of God, you know, like the first time I shook his hand, like I just felt the Spirit of God like come through. Like, you know, those people just walk in the room, you're like God came in with him, you know. Yeah. Like that's what I felt. And he just encouraged me. You know, he's like, "This is not the end of your story." And I never thought that God would be able to use me because of my past. And I always thought that it would hinder me from being able to do things, especially in ministry. And it's been the opposite, you know. And I remember being inside and the chaplains, I joined a program called TLC, this Transformational Living Community. And you know, Chaplain Paul and a couple of the chaplains that were there, Chaplain Phil and Chaplain Goodwater, like they were just men that came in every day, you know, to spend time with prisoners, you know, the worst of the worst in society. Like they came in to pour their hearts out to them. And I remember my transformation inside came from like the switch that flipped the good way, came from, we used to do a program called Ariga House with South Central Foundation's FWWI, the Family Wellness Warriors Initiative, and a lot of awesome people. And this is where I met my second mentor, G. McConnell, and there was a few people that were in that organization. They came in And I remember you have a whole week. I did this program 3 times because I got so much out of it.
Yeah.
But you start off the week talking about how you've been hurt. And then you move into how you've hurt others. And then you move into the healing for both, right? And the forgiveness and the understanding victimization. And it was because that's something I never understood before was victimization until I talked to a victim. The same thing that happened to her, I had done, right? And so it helped me to understand what I had done, how I had created the situation, and what I could do, even if it was just through prayer, even if it was just through asking God for healing for my victims, you know? And so the stigma that comes with that, the stigma that comes with being a registered sex offender, you know, meeting new people, and the sad thing, I love kids, you know what I mean? But I can't be around them unless I have approval from my PO, right?
Yeah.
And this is something I shared with you last night on the phone when we were setting up this meeting. I said there's certain things that I can't do even to this day, you know, because I'm still on probation. They gave me 10 years probation, and God knew what He was doing. He gave me 15 years with 9 suspended. Right. I went in and I got 6 years technically for actual prison time. I only did 4 because I had good behavior. And I get out and it was prophesied over me that when I got out, I'd hit the ground running. And that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
And ever since then, so like I met Corey, which is an awesome man of God. Like
our mutual friend.
Yeah, our mutual friend. I met him inside. He came in to preach when I was at TLC. He came in to preach to us. And he was like one of the first men that I felt what he was saying, right? And I felt that he believed what he was saying. It wasn't just going off of some notes. It wasn't just, and he spoke like I wanted to speak, right? He talked about the word like I wanted to talk about the word, and he had conviction in his voice, and I just felt what he was saying.
Yeah.
I mean, I still remember the sermon. He was talking about the seed of Abraham, like, and comparing it to to Jesus, right? And so
it's one of his favorites, I know.
Oh, I know,
he's passionate about that.
But to this day, I can tell you what he preached about.
Yeah.
Why? Because like he was so passionate about it.
Yeah.
And so I was attracted, like my spirit was attracted to his spirit, right?
Yeah.
And so when I got out of prison, so I spent 4 years, and I did as much ministry as I could when I was inside. God brought people, like God brought, I'm not going to mention names right now, but like God brought what we call in prison shot callers to my cell to talk to me about sexual issues, right? So this is a person that they would normally tax. This is a person that they would normally, I don't know what taxing is, but like they would threaten someone that they would have to pay them every week for them not to get beat up or not to get rolled up. You see what I'm saying?
Okay, yeah.
Or shanked or whatever you know, the case may be. And I, in 4 years, did not have to fight one person. In 4 years, I walked the yard just like everyone else.
Wow.
Right? And these men, even the ones that knew about my past, even the ones that knew why I was in prison, they never came at me. They never threatened me. I would get put, and I got transferred. I told you yesterday that I never got to stay in one place for a long time. Every time I get comfortable, God would move me. Yeah. So in 4 years, I transferred 9 times.
Wow.
So in those times, like you have to be reestablished each time you go somewhere. Yeah. Okay. So just imagine like it's
like
not like
your place in the culture in that.
Yeah, and it's not like the movies, you know. I'm not gonna say it's like that, but especially Alaska prisons are not like the prisons down south. They're a lot softer. But like up here, there's still violence, and there's still people that think that they gotta prove themselves, especially the younger guys. But God would put me in situations, and one in particular, I'll give one prison story. I walk in to this new. It was back to AJ. I got transferred back to AJ. Anchorage jail, and they put me in the workers mod. And the workers mod was for workers, and I obviously didn't have a job because I just got there. Yeah. And I walk in, and this enormous Samoan is looking at me, like, you know, there's gonna be trouble. And he calls me over to his table, and I walk over, and I was just like, you know, and I was praying the whole way there, like, God, just protect me. Like, and what I used to pray is, God, don't make me prove myself. Yeah. Please don't put me in a situation where I'm going to have to use my hands, because God made it very clear when I went into prison, I will use those hands to heal, not to hurt anymore. Yeah. So I walk over there and I'm praying, Lord, please don't let this be what I think it is. You know, please protect me. Please protect them. Like, do not. And what I would tell people when they would ask me why I didn't fight, I would say because it would destroy my testimony. It would make you think that I was just like everyone else. I want you to know that the Holy Spirit resides inside of me and that there's something different, so that you want that something different too. Yeah. Right? Because it's all the Holy Spirit, right?
Yeah.
So I walk over to his table, and I'm going to say his name because I hope he hears this. His name was Kosei, enormous Samoan. And he calls me over, and I was like, "What's up, man?" And he's like, "I know you." So immediate like anxiety, you know what I'm thinking, like, here we go. And he goes, "Don't I know you?" And I was like, "I don't think so." I was like, "I'm pretty sure I would remember someone of your size." and when I say huge, I'm saying like 6'4", probably 350, 400 pounds, like just a big dude.
Yeah.
And he's like, "No, I know you." And I was like, "I don't think you do." And he goes, "Were you at Palmer Correctional Center, right?" Yeah. And I was like, "Yeah, I was." And he goes, "You play the guitar. You sing, huh?" Because I used to lead worship for TLC.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Man, you're the reason I go to church."
You're kidding.
Not kidding. And I was like, "You gotta be kidding me." Because I like immediate, like, I calmed down, right? And he goes, "Yeah, man." He's like, "I used to love coming in and hearing you sing." And he's like, "I love the way you worship." And he's like, "I had some problems myself, but, you know, I gave my life to the Lord."
Wow.
Praise God. And then he goes, he calls all his people, because he was the mod boss, right? So he calls all his people over, and he says, "This dude eats with us. He gets extra trays. Nobody messes with him. If anybody's got a problem with him, they come to me." Right?
Wow.
And I'm just like, you got to be kidding me. So here's, in the presence of my enemies, right? I will prepare a table for you in the presence of your enemies. And not that he was my enemy, but I knew that there was others in there that were, you know. And he put the person that was in charge to protect me.
Yeah.
Right? Like my Samoan angel. And I was only there for a short time, but God opened this door, and they asked me to lead a Bible study. And Chaplain Silliman was still there, so he'd bring me whatever I needed, right? So I'm leading a Bible study in this worker mod. The fights went down, like all the drugs like stopped running, and like it was just this awesome moment, like a 2-week span. And then they transferred me back, right? And I use that story because I want to fast forward. I'm directing the Sullivan Arena, right? I'm the what I forgot what they called me. The shelter manager is what they called me.
Yeah, and tell us what the Sullivan Arena is.
The Sullivan Arena is the Sullivan Arena was there for hockey and sporting events, but they turned it into when COVID hit. They took all the homeless people and put them in this one place, and it was to basically segregate them so that they would have a safe environment, but also stay away from the public, because they thought the homeless population was going to be the worst when it came to COVID, as far as spreading it goes.
Yeah.
So put me in this. I was doing street ministry at the time, and I couldn't get inside.
This is post-jail.
Post-jail. Yeah, this is far post-jail. But I said fast forward because while I was at the solo... Or should I just wait till I get to that part?
No, you can fast forward. Let's stay on the track, yeah.
At this point in time, and this is a municipal property. The Sullivan Arena is municipal property.
Yeah.
So, you know the separation between church and state.
Yeah.
This was told to me. But I told them when they hired me, because I worked for Beans Cafe, I said, if you hire me, but you interfere with the ministry that God called me to, I will quit and go back to the streets. And they said, nope, you can do whatever you need to do. We just want you to work for us. So they created a job position for me. And God used it to work my way up to, I started off, I think it was like food service coordinator or something like that. And they moved me up to the shelter manager. So I was directly under the director. So I handled all the inside stuff. She handled all the outside stuff. And, but in that, I got to speak to the municipality and ask them, can I please have church here? And so my wife and I started leading a church service in the parking lot to start off with. And then we had to move inside when it got cold. But we had a church service every Sunday, you know, and they would allow me to pray with people at any time. And then I was, able to minister to people. One of those people who walked in was Kosei.
Wow.
And he walks in and he was heavily on drugs, and he had gotten out of prison, and he was just messing up. And he saw me and he recognized me. Inside prison, he didn't know my past, but he had found out when he came in. And so when he saw me, he just kind of like, gave me the side eye. And I was like, I still love you, bro, you know? And I tried to give him a hug, and he kind of gave me a hug, but then he went his own way. He had a few altercations while he was at the Sullivan, and I remember one in particular, they couldn't get him under control. Now, remember how big Kosei is, right?
Yeah.
So I got security staff, you know, I had 6 guys with me, and they're afraid to go in because he's high on spice and meth, and he's out of his mind.
Yeah.
And I remember God just telling me, get low. That's all God kept saying to me, just get low. I was just like, what does that mean, Lord? Just
that was
get
my
low.
question, yeah.
So I go over to him, and that's all I keep hearing is get low, right? And so I told Kosei, I was like, man, you got to get your stuff. You got to get out of here. Like, you can't act like you're acting. Like, everyone is terrified of you right now. And so he starts coming at me. He's like, you scared of me too, you know? And I'm like, I'm not scared of you. And what I used to tell people when they had demons or anything like that, all I would say is, who you're talking to. Mm-hmm. And what I meant by that, because it was spiritual, it wasn't, I didn't think that I was tough or anything like that. That part of me is dead and long gone. But I was letting the Spirit know the God that I serve, the Holy Spirit that resides inside of me is much more powerful than you. Yeah. Right. And so when I would say, who you're talking to, like, my spirit, man, the warrior that I am in the spirit realm. So like, who you're talking. And that's what I told him. I said, who you're talking to. And he stopped dead in his tracks. Wow. This humongous man stops dead in his tracks. And everyone around me is looking, and they called me pastor. Like, they knew that I led the church service, and a lot of them would come. And that I prayed with people anywhere, anytime. Like, I didn't care what it looked like or, who was around. But when that happened, it was like something shifted, right? Everyone was like, oh my goodness, like, because they thought he was going to kill me. Yeah. And so I start walking towards him, and again, I'm hearing, get low. So I'm like, what does that mean? And he starts saying, you think you're better than me. You think you're better than me. And I was like, absolutely not. I was like, if anything, I'm worse, Yeah. And he goes, I know about you. I found out, I know about you. And I said, you're right. I said, but that's the old me, and that can be the old you. And when I hear get low again, I drop to my knees. And he goes, no, I can get lower. He said this to me. I can get lower. So it's like he could hear what I was hearing. Yeah. And I'm like, I will lay on the ground if that's what it takes. And he goes, no, get up. And he comes over to help me just like he did in the mod, right? And I said, I just want you to know that however low you go, I'm going to go lower. I was like, because that's how I see you, and that's how God sees you. I was like, we love you. I love you. And I said, just give me a hug. And he gives me the biggest hug. I mean, he's an enormous man. He gives me this hug. And he wouldn't let go. I said, hey man, let's just walk out of here. Let's stop scaring these people and let's just walk out of there. Now, this man was on high on, and I don't know if you've ever seen anyone high on spice. They're not in their right mind. Yeah. But God sobered him up in that moment. Wow. And so I say all that because it was like each moment in my life, right? God used it. Yeah. God used it. So like when we hear like God works all things together for good for those who love him, those who are called to us according to his purpose, right? Yeah. So each moment of my life, my combat training, my experience in the military, my experience, all of these things have been used. And so moving forward, or going back to those moments in prison, God kept taking me from place to place and protecting me and using me to minister the gospel, to preach the gospel, to share the good news, right? And so like you talked about the gospel being the meat of this, right? And how the gospel has affected my life. What I started to realize is that my testimony, right? The Bible says that we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And he told me, like, I'm going to use your testimony. I'm going to use your testimony to help the people that feel just like you felt, that feel alone, that feel like they're all alone and that they can't speak out or they can't serve me because they're scared of what people will think of them. They're scared of being rejected, right? And the word sex offender, when you hear that, like when most people, I don't know about you, but when most people hear that word, they get that cringe, that like, oh, he's a registered sex offender, right? But is that my title? Or is my title redeemed child of the Most High God, right? And that's what I believe about myself. Yeah. And so when God brings me into a new place, like, yes, I have my past. I have all of those consequences still from my actions, from my horrible choices that I made to victimize my own daughters. But God has redeemed me. God has covered those in the blood. Like, I have repented for everything. And I pray that one day I will be able to to seek their forgiveness.
Yeah.
You know, and I pray that one day they will know, like, not just how sorry I am, but how much I kept the promise of I will do whatever it takes. So while I was in prison, I read every book I could get my hands on. My mom was so awesome in prison. Like she never stopped communicating. My stepdad too. And this is where my relationship with my dad was healed, because as I understood victimization and the program I was talked about with MWI, it opened my eyes to saying, like, I can have reconciliation with my dad. I can talk to him about this, and like I believe that he'll receive this now. So he came to visit me. And we had this conversation. I said, I want to talk to you alone. I don't want your wife, because he had a new wife at this point. Yeah. I said, I don't want your wife to be here. Like, I want it just to be me and you. And I was able to share those things. You know, and it brought healing to our relationship, to where now I have like my pastor dad back. Like I can talk to him about scripture, and I can talk to him about the Lord, and he shares stories from the streets, you know, and we get to go back and forth now. So it's amazing what God did and how much God used to heal him, because he had a lot of the same issues that I had. Yeah. But he never got caught. Yeah. You know, he never had to go to prison. He never hit rock bottom. Yeah. You know, but God used my life and my testimony to heal him. Wow. And so all of that stuff in prison. So I got any book I could read about the brain. I wanted to know why I thought the way I thought. I want to know why I acted the way I acted. And what I told the Lord is, I want to teach other people, not just men, but other people, how to fight. Yeah. Right? So all that combat training, everything else, like, I want to learn. I said, Lord, I want to know how to fight spiritual warfare. I want you to teach me how to be a spiritual warrior. And I want to be able to teach other men and women how to do that. And so since then, I've got to meet a lot of great people, and I've got to be mentored by a lot of great men and women, and they have taught me so many things about spiritual warfare. And the Holy Spirit has just walked me through this to where, you know, coming to a place like Hilltop. Yeah. You know, so I met my wife afterwards, and we worshiped together, and we had some awesome times. You know, the Lord really, really blessed us in a lot of different things, but he kept moving. You know, he kept, like, every time I get comfortable, the Lord moves me. And so he kept moving me to where I keep going further north. Like, the Lord just keeps calling me further north in Alaska. Whereas when I first I just wanted to be back in Texas. I just wanted to go back home and be in the warm climate next to the water, you know, just fishing all the time and hunting. But the Lord had different plans. Yeah. You know, and so now here I am, you know, at Hilltop Assembly, and leading worship, and I step in when they ask me to preach or teach, and just sharing what God's done in my life, and sharing the gifts that God's given me to bless others and to show them the gospel, instead of just, because I always tell us, like, I'd much rather see a sermon than hear one. Yes. You know, I want people to look at me and see Jesus. I want people to hear me and hear Jesus. I don't ever want it to be about Aaron Lockridge, because that's what it used to be. Right? I was a glory hound. I was always seeking someone's approval. You know, and the military, that's super difficult to get over, because you're constantly trying to be the best. You know, and so when I got to the top of my career field at a very young age, like, I was the youngest person to go through the advanced training that I went through, and then I became an instructor for it. Right. Oh my goodness. Like, to feed my ego. Yeah. Like, my ego was already stupid and out of control, and now I'm the best in what I do. Yeah. You know, or I shouldn't say the best. I was one of the best in what I do. And so it just kept feeding my ego, and kept feeding it worse and worse and worse. And the Lord and the enemy used that to create that wall. Yeah. You know, to where I'm never going to let someone in to see the real me. And since then, I don't believe in secrets anymore. I mean, I'm not saying like I don't believe in secrets.
I know what you mean.
I don't believe in keeping
we should not keep secrets.
Yeah. Because secrets destroyed my life. Yes. And secrets didn't just destroy my life, but they destroyed my wife's life. They destroyed my children's life. They destroyed all the people around me's life. And that's what I understood about victimization, is that it changes everyone around you. It's not just you that gets hurt, it's everyone around you that gets hurt. And when I understood that, man, what the Lord did in me. And I remember I got sent to the hole. You know, you hear about the hole in the prison, right? So I got sent to the hole, and I was in the hole for something I didn't do. This is the greatest part about it. For something I didn't do, and I'm in the hole, and I'm like, Lord, why did you do this? Because, you know, as soon as I walked in, I had an enemy, and he starts yelling, like, he creates this crazy story about why I came in, and people just buy it, like, you know. they all jump on the band, like banging on the walls and screaming and yelling, ripping the phone, like, you know, you get a phone that's a pay phone, they just rip it out of the cell.
Yeah.
And it was horrible, you know, and I'm sitting out like I had the worst headache, the worst migraine you could imagine, 3 days. And in those 3 days, the Lord is telling me, I want you to confess every sin that you've ever committed to me. I want you to dig deep, and I want you to find all these generational curses and all these things that have been placed on your life and spoken over your life, and I want you to renounce them. I want to bring to the forefront of your mind everything that I want to heal you of, so that you can actually go and minister the gospel for me.
Wow.
And I was just like, huh. And so for 3 days straight, with the worst headache I've ever had in my life, like crippling, blinding headache, you know, and in the hole they keep the light as bright as possible. And so I did that, you know, and it was one of the most freeing experiences. And it was so crazy because after the 3 days was over, you know, 3 days, after the 3 days was over, they moved me to a different, because there was punitive segregation and there was administrative segregation. Yeah. I was in punitive during this 3 days. As soon as the 3 days was over and I had confessed the last sin that God brought to my mind and repented for it, I get moved to this nice quiet cell in administrative seg where no one knows me and no one cares about me. And it was just so, and then all of a sudden the charge that I had received because someone had tried to make a false accusation against me gets dropped, and the PO calls me in and apologizes and sends me back to where I came from. Wow. And that was like the extent, like my prison time was a time of healing. It was a time of growth. I devoured the word. I had never even read, like growing up in church, right? My whole life growing up in church, I had never even read the Bible the whole way through, right? Yeah. Because in Sunday school, you stick to the main stories. Yeah. You know, you stick to Noah and the Ark and, you know, Moses and the Red Sea and all. Right. But you never really like dig into the Bible. So you're stuck on that milk instead of the meat. And man, he had me devour that word. And every day. And what it would do is that, because you had the windows, and I would read my word on my desk by the window, and they would walk by and they would see me every single day, and that was the one thing that they would say to me. It was like, we watched you for a long time before we came and talked to you, and we see that you're not just doing that jailhouse religion, right? Like, you actually care, and you actually, and guys would come to me with issues. I remember a certain individual came to my cell, walks inside, asked me if he could talk to me, and he didn't need to ask me anything. He pretty much ran things. And I was like, absolutely, man, have a seat. And he's like, he starts talking to me about masturbation. And I just looked, I was like, what made you come in here? He goes, I don't know. He's like, you just look like someone that I can talk to about this.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah, and that's what God did. God set up time after time where I was able to help someone, or to teach someone, or to counsel someone, or to just love on someone, to pray with them. Yeah. And so that led to outside of prison. So when I got out, you know, I went to Acts 2:47, which was the first church that I'd ever felt like I was part of it. Like I felt like I was part of the family. Yeah. You know, and there's a lot of people there that had been to prison. A lot of people that had, you know, everyone's tatted up. You know, Corey and Aaron are both sleeved out. You know, like it was, and that's where I met my wife. You know. Yeah. And it was just it was a great experience. And so I started wanting to serve more. I started wanting to, so that's when I met my brother Jose. You know, my brother Jose is, he's probably one of the most on fire for God people you ever meet. He's very loud. He's very boisterous. He comes from the streets of Brooklyn, you know, super hardcore gangster back in the day. You know, when we would go out to the streets together, he would always say, like, you know, bring your Tommy gun, because I always carried my guitar case. And we would just go to the streets and you know, sit down in the middle of the street, and I would start playing my guitar and singing, and people would just come around us. You know, and we had a team of like 5 guys to start off with. Yeah. And they would pray with people, and while the people were standing around me, listening, and then what God told me when I was inside, when I first learned how to play guitar, because I learned how to play guitar in prison. He said, "I'm gonna bring him in with your music, and you're gonna teach him my gospel, right?" and so like in that moment, I was like, "Oh, it's happening," you know, because they were just, it was like they were mesmerized. Yeah. Like the Holy Spirit just had all of them, and they were just coming in, and they just did like this half circle, because I was sitting on the curb. Yeah. You know, and people were just throwing up and spitting, and like it was horrible. And then you'd have like the demons come out, and just like each experience in the streets was so unique. Like each one was so unique, and but what it did was open my heart to loving people that a lot of society would call unlovable. Yeah. And it really opened my heart to the natives, because I started to see that God would bring these negative, and one native in particular, his name was Sergi. He was Yupik. And the first day I met him, I was standing in Beans Cafe just waiting for someone to be prayed for. Right? I would always go in there and I would pray and pray and pray until God brought me to that one person, right? Yeah. But as I was standing there praying, I have a Bible in my hand, and he comes up to me. He's my size, native cat, and he said, he said, and I'm gonna use his accent because it was awesome. He's just like, "I'm gonna put you in the dirt." His first words to me is, "I'm gonna put you in the dirt," and I was like, and I said the same thing to him. I said, "You know who you're talking to?" And he just kind of looked at me sideways, and he goes, "Oh, I'm a Marine." And I've been a Marine, and he talked about like his 25 years of service and everything. And I was just like, okay, you still know who you're talking to. And he, again, just kind of looked at me weird. "I could kill you." And I said, "You probably could." I was like, "And I'm still going to love you afterwards." and so this literally happened for a couple months in a row, because I went there constantly. Yeah. And this is in Beans Cafe. And I would go there constantly. And every time I saw him, he would come up and tell me he's going to kill me. And I still love you every single time, because that's all God kept telling me to say, is like, just tell him you love him. Just tell him you love him. All of a sudden, one day he comes up and he goes to say it. And I said, "I still love you. Before you even tell me you're going to kill, I still love you." And he broke, and he starts crying, and he starts telling me like, "You don't know what I've been through, and you don't know what I've been forced to do, and you wouldn't love me if you knew." And I said, "Oh, I would, because you don't know what I've been through, and you don't know what I've been forced to do, and you don't know what I did on my own. Like these things, I promise you, nothing you tell me is going to change the fact that I will still love you, and definitely nothing you can tell God is going to make him stop loving you." And he just, "Oh man, these waterworks," and then he started being embarrassed because he saw that his friends could see him, right? So he walks away, right? Yeah. He comes back the next time, and now he's angry again. And this goes on for months, and then he asked me, he's like, "Can we go?" Because they had given me the room upstairs, and we turned it into a prayer room. Yeah. We cleaned it out. It was like a storage room. We cleaned it out, put a table in there, some chairs, and we turned it into a prayer room. Yeah. And he asked me if he could go up there with me. I said, "Absolutely, let's go." So we go up there, and I tell my wife as I'm going up there, I was like, "Please keep everyone out of here. Like, we need some time for him to process." Yeah. We go in there. This guy starts throwing furniture. He starts slamming his fist down. He's yelling and screaming at me. And I'm just sitting there, and God's just like, just wait. Just let it happen. I was like, all right. So I'm waiting, and he was trying to scare me. Yeah. And so he gets done, and I asked him, I was like, "Are you done?" And he's like, "Yes." I was like, "Sit down." So he sits down, and we start talking, and man, this guy just shares the most horrific story. Like, forced to kill his own brother when he was 12, in the village, molested and sexually abused, not just molested, but raped as a child by the elders. When he tried to come forward, they threatened to kick him out of the village. So he joined the military, joined the Marines at a young age, just to get away from all of that. He became an alcoholic, just like the rest of his family. Turned to drugs and alcohol, and then was in Vietnam and was forced to kill so many women and children, and it just haunted him. Yeah, and he was so broken. And so the Lord just kept telling me to listen to him. Just listen and love him. Listen and love him. And so that's what I did. And it changed my outlook on even evangelism or even sharing the gospel, right? Because God taught me it's not about thumping people with that Bible. It's not about going out and sharing that one verse is going to change their life. It's about showing them Jesus. Yeah. It's about doing what Jesus did. Like, so he hung around the sinners. He hung around those people that were, had those ill reputations and people that shunned, society shunned them because they were the worst of the worst. He hung around those people because he wanted us to see that his love is for everyone. It's not for just the people. He didn't come you know, for the people that didn't need the physician. He came for the people that did.
Right.
You know, and so that's what he started to open my eyes to, especially like this love for natives, and it changed my heart towards all of them. So I would spend days in the streets, and then what's even funnier, I talked about God moving me, right? Mm-hmm. I'm newly married. I have this new job. I'm doing well, very well actually. And my boss calls me in. I had 3 promotions in 3 months. My boss calls me in. And he said, and to the place that he had promoted me all 3 times, he calls me in and I'm like, man, I just got back from a honeymoon.
Yeah.
And he said, you're no longer part of the team. I was like, wait, what?
Because you were comfortable and now it's time to move on.
There. But I hadn't seen this pattern yet, right? So like now I'm starting to see it. So I'm like, Lord, what am I going to do? And on my way out, like I start seeing, he shows me a vision of my old mentor's business card. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what does that mean? You know, like, what do you want me to do with that? And what it led to was me being in full-time ministry. Wow. You know, and trusting him that he was going to provide, and trusting him that he was going to always be there for me, and that I would rely on him for things, not for my own power, my own abilities. And it even led my wife to start understanding that, to where we got rid of all of our furniture, so that if we ever needed to move for mission, like we could just pick up and go. Yeah. And so, and that's what it's become. You know, and right now I'm in that moving phase. Yeah. You know, he's got me in the uncomfortable place where I have to completely trust and rely on him. Yeah. And the people that he puts around me to provide, and, you know, praying that my bills are going to be paid, not by, because and he's also dealt with my pride when it comes to even paying for things. Yeah. Like I'm a worker. I don't like when people give me handouts. I don't like when people give me charity. Like I want to go earn that money. Yeah. But he's dealt with my heart in that, you know. He said, this is your work, you know, what you're doing is your work, and a man is worthy of his wages, you know. And so I am a believer of he who doesn't work doesn't eat. Yes. But I also am, if the Lord uses someone to bless me, like I'm not going to rob them of their blessing by turning. No, I'm good. You know, I need to work for that. Like, what can I do for you? Yes. And so, anyways, like it's developed. That's
been a process for me as well. That concept. Yeah. I hear you.
But growing up in the church, like, you know, it's hard to get through that, especially if you've been hurt already by the people in leadership that were over you, right? You know, because I haven't served in a ministry that I wasn't let down or disappointed by the men or the women that were in charge, right? And you know, one thing, especially working with Corey and praying with Corey, one thing that I've learned and one thing that I've heard so many times, even from his mouth, is that if I'm putting all my trust and hope in man, I will always be disappointed. I will always be let down. You know, he said, my hope is found in Jesus. Yes. And so it's slowly changed my thought pattern, you know, because that's the thing, is like we have neural pathways that are created. Yep. And this is one of the things that I studied about the brain. One of the best books I ever read by Dr. Jennings. It's called The God-Shaped Brain. You know, and he's this neuroscientist that like breaks down the brain and the workings of the human brain. And he uses all his fancy doctor terms, but he breaks it down in layman's so that we could understand it. Because I definitely did not go to med school. And it helped me understand like why I thought the way I thought, and the lies that I attached myself to, and that I believed and agreed with, that led me to think and act the way that I did as an adult. Yeah. You know, the things.
And it takes work to change those neural pathways, which are like ruts in your brain.
The leading scientists even agree that the science is just now caught up with the Bible. Yeah. You know, that when the Bible says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's talking about those neural pathways being renewed. Yeah. And they started to see when they studied the brain, like a sex addict and a coke addict, they put an MRI scan, the top view scan of their brains side by side, and they almost look identical.
Wow. I've heard that before. Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason why is because the same parts of the brain shut down when they're using them. And the same chemical release is given when the pleasure is sought after and released. Right. Yeah. And so finding all this stuff out about myself saying like, oh, that's why I think the way that I think, or that's why I act the way that I act, or this is the lie that I agreed with, or this. And the Lord is still revealing things to me. I'm still in the process. I don't think that
it'll be a lifetime process. Right?
And that's I feel like sanctification it happens until glory. So until God calls me home, or until Jesus comes back to get me, like I know that I'm going to continue to be sanctified and healed.
And we all look forward to that moment of just complete clarity of mind, where your mind is totally sound, not broken by wounds or ruts in your brain, all of that. That's something we all look forward to. Well, Aaron, thank you for telling your story. I think there's going to be a lot of people who will resonate with different parts of your story, and like you said, all the people out there who feel alone, or they can't say anything because of shame or circumstances or whatever it is. I hope they listen to this and know that they're not alone. So, well, thank you for taking the time. And man, I need to look this up really quick. I thought of this. I went for a long walk this morning and I wrote this down. I have a file on my phone called Nuggets of Truth. I wrote this morning and I'll read it to you because it's your story. Here it is. Our healed wounds become our passions. Our unhealed wounds become our ruin. And I just thought that was relevant to you. Because if you have an unhealed wound, it ruins you if you don't deal with it. But if you heal from it, it becomes your passion. You want other people to heal from the same thing. And I definitely see that in you. So, well, hey, thank you for taking an hour and 45 minutes. I'm going to put all of it on, if you don't mind, because it was all very, very good.
I don't mind.
Good. Well, thank you, Aaron, for taking the time. And maybe we'll do some more episodes with you again. It sounds like you have a stockpile of stories.
I do.
So if you ever think of more, let me know and we'll record some more of your stories.
Okay.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
If you have a story that you would like told, please contact me at tysalaska@gmail.com. tysalaska@gmail.com.